actually part of the Hatch planning team. So Dan and I are going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll be monitoring people and letting them in as they filter in. And we are recording this session for future use. So anyone that wasn't able to attend will be able to watch it. And so I heard you say that Amy Kavanaugh isn't going to be able to join us this morning, but so I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay and Andrea to talk about culturally responsive teaching practices that incorporate social justice issues, which is a very timely topic.
Welcome everyone to culturally responsive teaching practices that incorporate social justice. As you may have heard, our colleague, Dr. Kavanaugh, is unable to join us this morning due to a personal family situation, but I am Dr. Andrea Kitomary. I'm the Student Retention Coordinator in the School of Education.
And I'm Dr. Lindsay Stoetzel, Assistant Professor of Literacy Education in the School of Ed.
So you may be wondering, what are culturally responsive teaching practices, more commonly known as culturally responsive pedagogy, or CRP? I quote Dr. Ladson Billings, leading expert on CRP. She states, a common misconception when engaging with CRP is believing that successful teaching is primarily about what to do. The truth is that successful teaching is primarily about how we think about our students, their communities, and broader social context, and about our curriculum, our instruction, and our role as teachers. CRP is not something that we incorporate or add on to our teaching. It is the foundation that grounds and informs every aspect of our instructional practice. It is the lens through which we approach our work. Therefore, culturally responsive pedagogy cannot be boiled down to a set of specific strategies, a checklist for lesson planning, or specific curriculum, end quote. So what we're going to hear today is one piece of a larger one-year project that we started in the fall of 2020. Because CRP incorporates learning about oneself, the other, meaning differences in student cultures and communities, and infusing this into our everyday teaching practices, along with the content you will hear about today, the education program has trained over 300 of our students in a four-part series on implicit bias to help our students reflect on their own biases and how those biases may impact pre-K through high school youth. And we've also given our students the opportunity to examine the historical and social economic impact that Jim Crow has had on shaping educational disparities that continue to persist today. So today's presentation will focus on how alumni teachers conduct read-alouds on social justice issues. So with that, we're going to give you an overview of our presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about the context, meaning who are our education students, give you what the problem is that brought about this one-year project, talk about our plan of action on how we address the problem, go over some preliminary research outcomes, and then discuss with you some of the the next directions we intend to take.
All right, so our context in the School of Education, we have approximately 583 undergraduate students that attend FSU on various campuses across the state. And today in particular, we're talking about programming that address the Big Rapids and Grand Rapids campuses. These are our demographics in this chart here. So you can see that 80% of our students identify as female, 20% male, 82% identify as white, with 18% represented by other racial groups, and just under 30% of our students are first-generation college students. These data follow national trends that illustrate the majority of teachers entering the workforce and those already practicing as teachers in American schools typically are white, females from middle-class backgrounds, and are monolingual English-speaking individuals. So this leads us into our problem of practice, which emerged in spring 2019 as part of our CAPE accreditation process. We were issued an area for improvement because of concerns that we were not providing diverse field placements for our undergraduates. When they were going out into the field, into their internships, they were not experiencing the type of diverse contexts that are required in order to prepare them to be culturally responsive instructors. And so this is a concern, both because logistically and contextually, we don't really have as much access to some of those spaces around the Big Rapids area. But even when we do in Grand Rapids, for example, when we place our undergraduates in like Grand Rapids public schools, that doesn't necessarily ensure that they're receiving professional mentorship in engaging culturally responsive instruction. So it is on us to ensure that that theory to practice bridge is being met. In addition to this local issue, we also know that since the 1960s, at least, there's been a push to develop teachers who do not see differences as a deficit, but engage in asset-oriented view of the children and communities represented in their classrooms. As you can see in this chart from the US Census Bureau, population trends are only increasing this need. Because we see an increase in terms of racial and linguistic diversity that will be represented in American classrooms, which means that many of our graduates are going to be teaching in racially, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse classrooms that are probably going to be distinctly different from the experiences those teachers bring into those spaces. So as we set out to really address what culturally responsive instruction could look like and address this need from our accreditors, long-term planning has focused on program redesign and redevelopment. But within our local locus of control, we wondered what we could do in the short term. And we are specifically teaching literacy courses. So we took a number of steps. One was a redesign of course syllabi. First, starting to ask ourselves, if we are just reading one article on culturally responsive instruction, or we have that as a subset in our syllabus, we are not embedding it as a grounding principle. So how do we reframe the courses to do that more holistically? And one method for one course, we redesigned the whole course using the text Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. And we highly recommend this. It's a fantastic read with implications beyond K-12 for thinking about the biological connections to culture. In addition, Dr. Kitomary developed the implicit bias trainings, but we also knew we needed something more practice oriented. So we redesigned one of our key assignments, the Interactive Read-Aloud. This is a hallmark in K-12 classrooms. Basically, teachers and children read a text together. Could be fiction, nonfiction, and you discuss it throughout the process. And we wanted to figure out how to do this, and in particular, do it with social justice issues that would allow students to engage in tough but necessary conversations. This was particularly important during the summer of 2020 and the aftermath related to civil unrest, everything related to the George Floyd killing. And so we wanted to see what were educators in the field doing and how could we prepare our teachers to engage in that same type of work. So this led us to create our plan of action, and we focused on creating 2 educator panels that our undergraduates could attend. Even despite the COVID and the craziness, we recruited 9 alumni from Ferris and my former institution, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And as you can see in this brief picture, they all fit the demographic of being white, middle-class, English-speaking women. So even though that troubled us, again, lack of diversity in our representation, we were able to recruit from diverse professional contexts, which was critical. Our alumni represented districts that are suburban, rural, and urban. They also, as kind of laid out on this slide here, are from classrooms with racial, linguistic, and socioeconomic diversity. And because of the pandemic, they were teaching in face-to-face, mixed delivery, and fully virtual classrooms. So they were able to explore how to engage culturally responsive practices and how to talk about social justice issues in a very wide range of classrooms with a very wide range of communities and student backgrounds.
So our educator panel 1 was entitled Facilitating Classroom Discussions on Social Justice Issues. And this panel discussion mainly focused on the importance of building relationships and creating safety in the classroom. And so some of the ideas that teachers shared were allowing yourself as the teacher to be appropriately vulnerable with your students. So they will also open up and share about their lives to continue to build relationships with students. Another one was setting norms for discussions with students to increase classroom care and accountability. Taking time before class to engage in conversations with students, and in higher ed, we would probably liken this to icebreaker type activities. Modeling how you want students to engage in conversation and how you ask and answer questions. So they talked a lot about using sentence stems to help students be able to discuss about social justice themes. Plan. You should always know the outcome that you want before you even get started with the social justice read aloud, and then using inclusive language and valuing your students through praise. Now, all of these are important considerations for higher education classrooms and programming, because if we're not intentional in developing relationships with our students, how can we expect them to feel safe to discuss social justice themes in our classrooms? Next slide, please. So educator panel 2 was entitled Lessons from the Field. And this gave our education students an opportunity to hear and learn about the practicality of leading a discussion on social justice themes. So in small groups by grade level, students were paired with a teacher. Each teacher covered the context of why they were teaching the social justice lesson, how they went about selecting the literary text, and how to conduct a read aloud based on the ages of the student, along with how they use their knowledge about the students and their communities to engage the students in discussion afterwards. So an example of this would be helping students make connections from the text to their home and communities, but also facilitating meaning making from words or situations in the text with students based on their cultural backgrounds. Next slide, please. Each panelist also reflected on the challenges she faced in conducting the read aloud and possible ways to mitigate those challenges in the future. The biggest challenge we heard from teachers was that they experienced a lack of student engagement in the discussion. Teachers remedied this challenge by allowing students to journal their thoughts before or after the discussions. They also used technology platforms such as Jamboard, Nearpod, or Pear Deck to help with online discussions. Next slide, please. Each panelist also shared with students how teaching social justice themed literary text helped them grow and develop as a professional. Teachers agreed that self-reflection about their upbringing and understanding about diversity in comparison to the vastly different student demographic they were teaching really pushed them to do some reading, some personal reading and professional development for themselves so that they would be prepared to answer student questions. Teachers also spoke about having discussions with other coworkers around selected texts and using cultural informants to help them feel comfortable leading the discussions with students. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our preliminary research findings.
So in total, we held our panels in the fall. They were fully virtual. We had 62 live attendees for panel 1 and 56 for panel 2. And we conducted pre and post surveys at those times. So some of the findings, we increased from 66 to 100% of our participants said that they believed they could engage students in classroom discussion. More importantly, 35 to 89% felt increased confidence, really, that they could lead discussions about social justice in the classroom. We also saw an increase in the number of participants who believed that engaging social justice issues that impact their student lives is a part of their job as a literacy educator. And we increased to 35% who believe they could strongly believe they could facilitate an interactive read aloud on issues of social justice. Though we do know this is related to self-efficacy and beliefs, and the next step is how do you transfer that to actual practice? Some of the feedback in an open-ended forum, which we also received from participants, was that they really appreciated the diversity of contexts that the teachers worked in, and simultaneously felt that they could connect with the presenters because they were from similar backgrounds. So it reinforced that this is something all educators need to do and all educators can do. Though they did note, as we have, that there is a lack of diversity within our panel itself. In terms of feedback on takeaways, the most important themes that emerged was this idea that reflection is ongoing. You begin with reflection before you launch the discussion, self-reflection, that implicit bias work, but then you're still working through that as you begin to do this work in the classroom. They thought that one of the most reaffirming things was that if you find yourself in a challenging discussion and someone says something and you don't know how to respond or you don't have the information needed, our educators on the panel repeatedly said you can step back. You can pause the conversation, tell students you're going to get more information and you want to revisit this conversation the next day, or you want to cool temperatures down and come back to revisit this. That it's okay to do that if you maintain honesty and curiosity as a co-learner beside your students. And that reaffirmed that they don't have to be an expert, that they can begin this work now. And then finally, we were worried because it was a virtual web series, but they felt that the format was very conducive to learning. The breakout rooms were more powerful, but they repeatedly asked for more time with the real world professionals to really dig deeper into some of their questions.
So now we're going to take a look at our next directions. And so we really want to continue leveraging our alumni in meaningful ways. And so the educator panels was just one example of how we're doing that in the education department. And so other ways that we're doing that is we're going to continue to involve our alumni in professional development programming for our students. Just yesterday, we had a session on classroom management best strategies. We tapped our alumni to come in and serve on our panel to help us talk through some of classroom management strategies with students. And so students were able to ask questions. Lots of ideas were given. It was a great opportunity. So we will continue to provide opportunities for our alumni that get them in front of our students. It's a win for them in that they're sharing their knowledge, and it's a win for us as a department. We're able to hear how things are changing in the industry. And it's also a win for our students because our students are they're able to glean from working professionals what it's like in the classroom. And then lastly, we will continue to collect survey feedback. I'm sure all of your departments do this from our alumni because we want to continue to improve what we're doing in the School of Education. Next slide, please. Lastly, when we began this project, we really were not only focused on engaging our alumni, but we really wanted to continue to see what's working and what's not working. And so we've shared with you some of the preliminary research that we've done. We want to continue to do research around this particular topic. We want to go back and talk to the teachers that agreed to participate in the panels. And then later on, because of COVID, we weren't able to get everything situated with having the students actually observe the teachers doing a read aloud and having that discussion. We want that to be a part of this program. We'll probably pursue that again in the fall, as well as having our students who are working with those teachers actually lead a discussion, a social justice themed discussion and read aloud with the teachers' students. And so again, we want to talk to the teachers about the experience. We want to talk to our students about this experience. So collecting qualitative and quantitative data along the way. And then lastly, we just want to continue to build long-term partnerships with our alumni. We want them to know that they are important and they are a part of the team in helping us to develop the students that we have currently going through our program. And with that, we are going to open it up for questions.
Hi, this is Bill Fisher. I'm faculty at Kendall, and we have a project called the Epic Project where we make educational media for all kinds of folks, teachers. And I guess my question is, what kind of, video media or maybe games are out there that folks like you can use to, support your teaching on this topic of the inclusive classroom?
Lindsay, you want to take that?
So I know there are, in terms of technology, there are like even simulations. We looked at some of that software that's supposedly supposed to, I say supposedly supposed to work. I'm clearly very skeptical of it.
Yeah, sure.
Because so much of it is, the biggest thing we teach is we cannot teach you how to do this.
Yeah.
It is based on the context. And it starts with, you have to get in a space, understand the community, understand the students, and then use that to inform your decision making in meaningful ways.
Well, sure. So media doesn't always have to be how to. It could be centered around that exact methodology and methodological approach. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen the VR simulations. We actually did some VR simulations for folks with so you would know what it was like to be a middle school kid with dyslexia in the lunch line trying to read the menu and everybody's yelling at you. For instance, we did that was pretty effective. That was pretty good, effective at building empathy, but that's a super specific situation that was kind of low hanging fruit in a way, you know? So I could see where what you're doing is far more fluid, but I mean, we're always looking for folks to make media for, so if if you think of something that we could make, it could be for elementary, middle, high school, or college, students that are trained to become college or K-12 teachers. We do all that stuff.
I think one area that media might be helpful right now, I'm working on taking the live presentations and developing them into modules. So this can be something that any of our faculty can use as a part of their teaching practice in the classroom with the implicit bias trainings, so that if students miss the live session for whatever reason, they're able to walk through that themselves. And so I think that's a really big part of it. Not only is it knowing your students, but you really have to take account of, your own biases, where you are, what you know about your identity as an individual, your cultural identity, your ethnic identity, and then how that interplays with what you know about your students. And so I definitely see an opportunity for technology to come into play with continuing to develop those modules for the students. So it can be something that just is sustained in the education program.
That would be perfect project for our students because, we did a series of animations for the Jim Crow Museum. We're going to do a presentation later about that. But, even the Jim Crow Museum staff, I mean, we're having conversations about, is this the right way to say this? Is this the right way to refer to this person? In history, we use these terms. We don't use those anymore. but since it's historical, should we use the historical terms? I mean, there's a lot of really interesting conversations. I think that's something that our students really, as media creators at Kendall and faculty, I'm going to raise my hand on this. So yeah, we all need to get better at this, and working on a project like that would probably help us to get better and maybe give you something useful. Susan, I think you were going to say
And then,
something.
yeah, I just wanted to point out, Andrea, you're talking about fighting bias, and we've already created in the EPIC project, a project called Epic Heroes Fight Bias. And it's all animations based on the social justice topics put out by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So it's incredibly connected into curriculum for K through 12. And they're just really short animations that teachers can pull up into the classroom and start conversations about justice, action, diversity, and identity. And those are the core topics for the social justice standards, which is a different kinds of standards than like Common Core. And so they're great little short animations that I'll put it in the chat for everybody to see, but I think that would be a place where you could start with, where we already have media for that.
That's great. Yeah, the media that I'm working on is for the actual pre-service teachers, not for them to take it into the classroom, but for them to do some self-reflection and kind of figure themselves out. But definitely that will be helpful to us as well in the department.
Great.
Susan, that's a great background you have. It seems to advertise what you're talking about well. So I know a couple of you well, and I know Andrea from Grand Rapids. But one of the things that, and I'm involved in education here in Grand Rapids a lot. The teachers that I know that are really effective at teaching in the schools are teachers who I see in the community doing other things, and so they have learned. And my sense is that they it's their own curiosity. I don't know if they came to the district with skills to do that, or if they can learn them. But so there's like what happens in the classroom is important work, but how do you prepare students while they're in an ed program to work in diverse places, and then how do you encourage them to continue to reach out? Because then I see a lot of well-meaning people who are still great teachers. It's just that they don't know how to connect with the community that they're teaching in, so they're less effective. I haven't seen it in books. I think Chris Emden wrote well about this in his book for white folks that teach in the hood. But yeah, I don't know how you prepare people. But anyway, I just wondered if you had any about that, because that takes leaving the classroom and leaving the Zoom screen to learn those skills.
Yes, absolutely. And I just entered into the chat. This is part of maybe that longer term planning we're working on. I have seen courses, especially early in programming, that do require students to go into communities, to visit different experiences, and to get kind of outside of their comfort zone and start to see how these communities live and breathe as a precursor to even getting into the classroom.
And I would love, I'll let Andrea.
I was going to say that that's one of the things that I'm going to hit in our next 2 series of implicit bias training that are coming up here in March. We're really going to look at and kind of press the point that students need to know the communities that they are serving in. And so that takes a lot of courage. And for some of our students, because of the backgrounds that they come from, they may not have that courage. So how do we, kind of build up their efficacy to be able to step into these uncomfortable situations?
And I didn't plan to advertise, but Susan and Bill did. So Ferris does have now 2 classrooms in a high school in Rapids at Southwest Community Campus. And I don't know how much it would have been more widespread had COVID not happened, because I haven't been able to invite anybody here yet. But we do have 2 classrooms that would be this, a group of students could visit, or I certainly, you guys know already arranged student teaching in the GRPS, but But we do have 2 classrooms on the southwest side at Franklin and just west of the expressway. So it's walking distance to two significant, there's an African-American community and a Latino community right here. And I would love to work with you guys to help connect students ahead of time.